Hey guys, it's the moment you've all been waiting for, the one that every artist dreams of, becoming amazing at anatomy. And we are going to start with the top, the head, and the skull underneath. What you will not learn is every anatomical part and each of their true anatomical names. That's not really important for us. What you will learn are the parts that matter most when you're rendering art of the human figure. So let's get started. Now you may be thinking, Mrs. Castillo, we've already learned how to draw the head. Well, yes and no. You've learned the kind of level 1 base, which was starting with that egg shape, which works pretty well, especially when you're going face on. However, that's not going to work for everything. That's not what we're going to be talking about today. What I want you to do from now on is to start with the circle. And the circle is going to be the brain. Think about our big brain cells. This is what separates us from monkeys, right? So you start with that circle for the brain, and then you add the jawline and chin. Let's take a look at the skull. I would venture to guess that almost everyone has seen this kind of anatomical presentation of the skull, but you may or may not have thought about it in terms of just the circle for the brain and the jaw. So I want you to take a look at me drawing digitally the circle where we would do if we were drawing this profile, and then the jawline. And just a kind of side note, pay attention to see this is where the ear would fall, where it lines up with the top of the eyebrow and bottom of nose. After you have that circle and jawline defined, you're going to add the cross. So just like we did on that forward-facing profile, or not profile, forward-facing face with the line through the middle vertically and horizontally, we're going to do that, but we're going to add a little bit of curve, especially if the face is not straight on. So like in the profile here, you see that the profile line is the middle line, and then the eyes curve around the side of the head. These two curves are going to help give the face shape, the head form, not just shape but form, make it look 3D. And then pay attention to where you're putting, especially that line across the eyes. That's going to really determine what direction the head is looking in. So these two lines really not only define the form, but completely make up the direction your head is angled. Let's take a look at this process on top of a skull that's angled. So again, I start with that circle, and right now, before I do the jawline, I'm actually starting with the cross so that I can show what direction that the skull is looking at, is pointing in. And then I add the jaw around that cross. So a little bit different than we talked about before. Afterward, you're going to follow the same steps as you normally would, where you're adding the section for the eyes, the line for the bottom of the nose, in between the lips, and bottom of the chin. I'm going to have you guys on only one page of your sketchbook, or if you're doing it digitally, on one layer, create 5 different heads and have each of them looking in a different direction. Now before you go ahead and start adding the fine detail, I want to talk about a few things regarding the skull. When learning anatomy, you really can't just know the muscles. You have to learn about the bone structure as well, because that's what's forming the foundation of our house. It's the frame, and it a lot of times will protrude in certain areas that we need to be aware of, because it's going to show up in our drawings. So the first one on the skull is going to be the cheekbones. If someone has really high cheekbones especially, you're going to see more shading or shadow underneath those cheekbones in the middle of the cheek. That's what's happening when women are using makeup to contour their face. They're trying to make themselves look like they have higher cheekbones. In line art, you may just see a line like I've drawn on this example here. And then the next one you need to know about is this temporal bone, where the temple is. So if you put your fingers on your temples where you might normally have a headache, and then you start pulling them forward towards your eye, you're going to run into the temple bone or temporal bone. And on some people this protrudes quite a bit, and you may have to include it with your value or with your lines and line art. But for every person, this is where our heads start going back in space. So think about this in terms of planar analysis. That's a plane that's receding into space, at least from the forward-facing position. So it's giving form to our head. It's also why a lot of times we see such a drastic curve on the eyebrows. It's because they start curving or appear to curve whenever they go over that temporal bone and recede in space. Another thing worth mentioning is the profile view. So again, we've talked about you do the circle, and the line in the middle is the side, the profile, and then the direction of the eyes, where they're looking. And then you can add in the eye socket, and just remember that things that are closer to us are larger than things that are further away, so it's going to kind of get smaller as it goes further from us. It helps to go back to our beginning stages and think of the eyeball as the sphere that it is, and add it in so you can see the direction that it's looking and capture the curve later on whenever we add in the final detailed line drawing of this face. You section off the face just like you would normally, where you have the line underneath the nose, between the lips, and underneath the chin. Pay attention to the eye. Notice how it's not all the way at the edge of the profile. It leaves some space for the eyebrow bones above and to the right in this case for that other eyebrow bone. It also is going to dip a little bit where that eye line is right before the nose. I also want to make sure you guys can see the alignment of these things. It's not super convenient, but like you have the edge of the eyeball going all the way down. The chin is further than that edge of the eyeball line. Notice that little space there. And if we go ahead and draw the nose, this is obviously going to be the furthest protruding thing on the entire face. Sometimes people get tripped up and they draw it further back, like they sink the whole chin backward instead of drawing that nose going out further, because they don't want the nose to look too big, but noses are big. And if you look at that alignment of the edge of the nose down to the bottom, nothing really goes quite as far as that nose. Our lips are going to meet, I would say on average, about halfway through or halfway across that space. Maybe somewhat in line with the eyebrow bone, but every person is going to be different. So if you're using a model or a photo, make sure you're drawing what you see. And then in between the lips, I think it's best if you start with kind of like this arrow pointing towards the mouth. That way it gives the top lip that kind of like lift to go up and out, and the bottom lip, the angle to go down and out as well. And then you connect the rest of the lines for the chin. Now we can start with some of the final details, and I'm going to start with the eye, and I'm going to curve around that part of the eye, because remember, we're seeing it from the side, so we're going to see that curve, and then it kind of goes off to the left, and somewhat curvy triangle. Again, it's going to be different depending on who you're looking at and how wide their eyes are, so on and so forth. Eyelashes point outward, eyebrow goes a little bit past the eye, further than the eye, and remember it curves around that temporal bone. Notice as well how the jawline leads straight into the ear, where you see that little circle on the skull. That's like where our ear canal is. And just like as per usual, the ear will line up with about the top part of the ear will line up with the eyebrow, and the bottom part of the ear will line up with the bottom of the nose generally. Now for the hairline. In addition to not making the brain or skull big enough a lot of times, people will also not make the hairline tall enough. You need to actually leave space for the forehead. I know everyone feels like they have too big of a forehead, but you really don't. Okay, most people have about 4 fingers roughly, so you need to leave that space. It's okay if you want to add bangs and the hair is going to come and cover up the forehead. That's totally fine. Just make sure that the direction of the hair, or the initial like starting point of the hair, comes from that hairline. Another thing people will often forget to do, and this is on not just the profile, is give enough volume to the hair. So maybe this is a bit too much on mine. I went back and fixed it. But depending on the hairstyle, it's going to be quite a bit. And occasionally you may have people who have it slicked back, or they're bald, or buzz cut. But in general, hair has volume. So leave a little extra space for that hair. The next thing is the neck. So we will go over the spine just briefly later on, but first thing you should know is that it goes back in space. It curves back. So that back line where it attaches to the head curves back, And that forward line, we are oftentimes tempted, including myself, to do a little curve forward, but remember it's going to curve back first before it curves forward for our chest. I highly recommend adding this little curve underneath the eyeball to show that it is going again back. And you can decide if you want to add a line for the cheekbone or the temporal bone. So finally we get to the first part of your assignment, which is to draw your 5 heads with detail, and shading is not required. You can go ahead and pause and do this now, or watch my run through if you need, but if you'd like to skip it, you can go to 1430. The next part of your assignment is going to use 2 different pages in your sketchbook. They're going to have somewhat similar things, but one's going to be a male and one's going to be a female. So you're going to draw the front and the back of the entire body just using the gesture drawing method. Okay, so we want the front and back of a male and front and back of a female body. For part 3 of the assignment, you are going to need 5 new pages in your sketchbook, and each of those 5 pages is going to be devoted to a different person. And you are going to start by drawing a differently angled head on every page. So we want to really challenge ourselves not only with the head, because we want to practice, obviously that's what this is for, but also thinking about what position the body would be in with this head. So draw the 5 heads first, and then you're going to come back in and add a different and challenging body pose using the gesture drawing method. In case you missed it, you should be drawing very, very light for all of these steps in the process, because you will be fixing things, for one, like you see me doing digitally, and you will also be going over these different figures as we learn more techniques. So you need to make sure you are practicing just putting the minimal pressure with your pencil so that you can go back and erase for part 4 of the assignment. Now, this is the most challenging thing that you will do on this portion of the anatomy videos, and it's something you've done before, which is planar analysis. And you are going to do this for not all 5, but 1 of the bodies that you choose out of those 5 different ones that you've just done in the gesture drawing style. So you'll erase until you only see your lines lightly, or if you drew them light enough, you can just go straight in and draw the planar analysis body. I know this seems overwhelming, but you need to just break down the body into different forms. Your arms are cylinders, your legs are cylinders, your torso is a cylinder. Everything's pretty much a cylinder or a sphere or some sort of flat plane, like our hands and our feet. So you're trying to think about where your body changes angles. So just like we discussed at the temporal bone, how our head angles back in space, think about your arm, your leg, where is the angle changing if you had to draw it. I know we don't literally have these hard angles on our body most of the time, but we are going to use this style to basically give our brains a jolt in remembering how forms work and where the body should be going back in space. So that's it for this first anatomy lesson. Make sure you've completed all 4 different parts. Let me know if you need help. Good luck and have fun.